Welcome back to Racing Rundown. This is one of a few previews that we are going to have on YouTube this upcoming weekend, and it's the biggest race that we're going to be talking about. It is, of course, the Arc de Triomphe, one of the premier races in the world. I'm certainly looking forward to this one. Eric, I know you are looking forward to this race. It's certainly doesn't have the star power that we usually have for an Arc de Triomphe, but with 20 horses, very much a wide open race. Certainly opportunities to make money in this race. So there's plenty of different ways you can go. A lot of interesting horses, and we're going to get into all of them now. So I'll let you give your thoughts on just in general this race before we get into the horses for this race. And I will mention one more time, there are 20 horses in this race. We are going to go through all of them, some less so than others, because there are some that have no chance and some that have slightly less of a chance, or I mean slightly more of a chance, and then there are some that are actual contenders. So the floor is yours.
It's a very exciting race. I think, obviously, we say no chance. Last year's victor, Torquatorr Tasso, who's back this year, he was a big long shot. But even then, there were some things in his form that maybe made him an overlay when all was said and done. But here's the thing. This year's Arc is, without a doubt, the most wide open, at least in my time as a racing fan. And that's pushing on 15, 16 years to this point. So watching all those Arcs, there's never been a race that's been this competitive, but in a way that there's just not a standout. And the favorites all have things you can knock against them, whether that's a lack of ability to go the distance or questions about it at least, or not true high-level experience, maybe dodging some horses, or just not putting wins together. I mean, so many questions that every single horse will have to answer, and even the winner will not have all their questions answered. We've been on such a big streak of horses that were invincible or had so much going for them heading into their career. Obviously, last year maybe a little bit of an outlier, but even heading into the race, there were still some real high-level, memorable horses in it. This year, those horses don't really exist, or those that do exist, way off form. So that just makes it an even more intriguing, exciting betting race, and I can't wait to watch it all unfold, because it's truly an unknown to me. I don't think I've ever been so unconfident in a race in a long time. And with that, we'll dive into the field, starting with the number one, Mishriff, breaks from post 17. Of course, a Saudi Cup winner, has I wouldn't say fallen off form, but it's been very maligned. Of course, everybody thinks he should be a Group 1 winner this year, having just narrowly lost the Coral Eclipse with a horrid trip back in July. But his 3 runs since then have not been too inspiring. Comes off of a 4th place finish, beaten about 2.5 lengths in September in the Irish Champions Stakes. A good run, but was never going to be best on the day. And I think a big question for me, at least heading into this, is the 1.5 miles. A very stiff 1.5 miles over soft ground at that. We know he's a Group 1 winner at the distance, having won the Shima Classic in 2021. A bonus, sure, but there's a reason they've stuck him at the 1.25 miles, the 10 furlongs that they've been running him at so consistently throughout his career. And that's just my thing. I think over soft ground, going 1.5 miles, it's not going to be his optimal distance. And I think there's other horses in here that can probably do it a little bit better. Not saying he can't run credibly. I just don't think we're going to see peak Mishriff, a horse who already age might be catching up to him to begin with, and then you put him under suboptimal circumstances. It doesn't point to a necessarily huge performance to maybe win this race. But who knows? Maybe his class can carry him through. Just kind of goes to the point that I made in the intro, that every single horse has questions they have to answer. But the distance is really what gets me here. I think he runs credibly, but I think the final 2 furlongs get to him.
There's a couple of things that I don't really like about Mishriff in this race. One thing I do like is he does pick up William Buick for this race, and it's certainly an upgrade over the ride that he got from David Egan in the Coral Eclipse. But he just seems like a 1.25 miles horse to me. And, Eric said it perfectly. That's why they've primarily stuck him at these distances. And the only time post-Shima Classic that he's gone 1.5 miles were 2 races at Ascot, both the King George. And he was beaten by Adyar in 2021, and he was beaten by Pile Driver and Torquatorr Tasso this year. And he didn't run bad races in either of those two King Georges, but just a horse that primarily seems to look like he is a 1.25 miles specialist. And I was done with him after the start that he had at Leopardstown in the Irish Champions. I really thought that was going to be his race to win this year, and he just showed that he had taken that step back that maybe he was eligible to take at this point in his career. And I think he's just so far off of his best form. Like, he should have won the Coral Eclipse, yes, but post that, I mean, it's not like he ran great at Ascot. Yeah, he was beaten 11 lengths by Piledriver and Torquatorr Tasso, who are not the world's best horses. And yeah, I mean, he ran behind Baaid, but he was not close to Baaid. And that was something that I complimented him on before the Irish Champion Stakes. But after that Irish Champion Stakes run, I just can't go to Mishriff here. I think that 1.25 miles is really his thing. He is very iffy over the soft ground because he won over heavy ground at Deauville back in 2020, but he also had a very poor start, or a very poor run at Ascot in the Champion Stakes in 2020, and then, this year it's been he's been iffy because he ran at soft at Leopardstown last time, didn't really run well there, so in his career, just overall inconsistent over the ground. In the distance, he's has won over it, yes, but inconsistent in 1.5 miles. And at this point in his career, probably, Eric, you said it best, looks like age is just catching up with him. So I don't have Mishriff either in this race.
On to number 2 from draw 18, the defending champ, Torquatorr Tasso. Pretty well regarded this year. He certainly will not be 72-1, and he does pick up Frankie Dettori for this year's edition. Dettori rode him last time out in a Group 1 in Germany, where he was beaten just ahead by Mendocino, who does also show up in this spot. They put on a good show in the Prix Vadeni. Not a terrible year for Torquatorr Tasso, and I think the biggest run came 2 starts back in the King George when he was second behind Piledriver. Obviously, he hadn't shown much outside of his big arc win on such a big European scale. But that day at Ascot, he absolutely did. When he chased home, Piledriver finished in front of 4 horses who are absolutely Group 1 caliber: Mishriff, Broome, Westover, and Emily Upjohn, 2 of which he'll face in the spot. And it wasn't like those horses were on top of each other. No, he was good 8 lengths clear of Mishriff when it was all said and done. So clearly proving once more that he can probably hang with these types. You do have to be a little concerned with his loss last time out, but I also think that the race didn't set up for him the way he probably wanted to. He's a horse that could probably use a little bit of pace in front of him. He doesn't come from necessarily way out of it, but he does like to come from off the pace. He wants a target, but if that target gets away with enough, that'll certainly do him no good. Now, when I draw this race up for this year, looks like from the outside draw and sitting a mid-pack trip, he'll be parked a little wide, but that did him no wrong last year when he had a very similar trip in that 14-horse field and picked up very well over the heavy ground. He was able to take it out in very convincing fashion, and it looks like it's going to be on the wetter side, probably soft ground for this year's arc. So Torquatorr Tasso once again plays really well into his hand, knowing that that's probably his preferred going. So I certainly don't think he's without a chance, and the market certainly agrees with that. I think there's no reason to look against him. You wish he'd be able to be putting more ones together heading into this race, but I don't think it's the worst thing in the world given. With the exception of the first run of the year, which was just very terrible back in May, he's done very good things in 3 starts since. So certainly one you have to think about using in every which way. Certainly a horse I think has a good chance to maybe not replicate what he did last year. It's very hard to win this race 2 years in a row, especially a horse from relative obscurity like Torquatorr Tasso is on a global scale. But he has the certainly right credentials to be a factor in this year's race.
I liked him quite a bit in this race, and I'll pour a little bit of fire on the concern of the that one bad start this year. And not that I don't think it's something to completely ignore, but the same thing happened to him last year, off of a 210-day break from November 2020 in Munich to that start in July of 2021. 200-day break, he ran 6 of 7 there. And it wasn't the same race, but very similar circumstances. A mile and 3 furlongs in that race, mile and 3 furlongs in start this year. 6 of 7, also beaten 18 lengths. Now, he was not beaten 18 lengths last year, but still beaten badly in his first start of the year. And it just seems like that this is a horse that does not run well with time in between races. And but subsequently from that, this year, won, and then Grade 1 or Group 1 placed, I should say, the last couple of times out. And I thought that his effort behind Piledriver was certainly a good effort in there. And again, he was Eric mentioned who he finished in front of there last year. Very similar. After that poor effort, he won a Group 2 and then was Group 1 placed, and then had his win going on, or his win going into the Arc, which was over Sisfahan, going a mile and a half, and then he obviously got the victory last time out in the Arc. And the other thing that's making me really like him in here is the potential for getting soft going here. Now, he won over that heavy turf last year. It's not going to be quite as wet as it was last year, but I do like the going, the potential for the going for him quite a bit here. So considered Torquatorr Tasso for a very long time. I haven't finalized my pick yet. He's one of the horses that I am still bouncing around in my head because I do think he's got a lot of upside. Eric did mention it's very difficult to win this race 2 years in a row. Hardly ever happens. So, he's not a sure thing, and, he would certainly probably be the weakest horse ever to win this race two years in a row. But that being said, he is certainly not without a chance in this race, and one that you absolutely have to consider in this spot.
Number 3 from post 19, Mare Australis for Andre Fabre. A horse who has kept it actually pretty solid company in France over the past 3 years. A victory in a Group 2, 2 starts back in June that featured a couple horses that will show up in this race. Mendocino, of course, good form since then, being one of those horses. But also a horse who's struggled when it comes to the true Group 1 level. I mean, a Group 1 winner won very nicely last May before missing the rest of the year. The last run doesn't excite you at all back in July. 7th, beaten about 10 lengths by Alpinista, and hasn't run since then on top of that. So certain things you do like, but at the end of the day, a lot of factors going against him, including 2 not terrible runs, I should say, to kick off the year, but definitely below winning this race, and then 1 very bad run last time out. Kind of sets Mare Australis back just a bit.
Yeah, I would pretty much fall in the same camp as Eric has. One positive note for this horse is he does have a run over soft going, which, as I have in the templates, I did make sure to put that out there because we do have the soft going, and it is something that I do think is worth looking at. So that's certainly an upside. Does have a win over a Group Stakes win over a mile and a half, which I'll get into that with some of the more backed horses to why I think that's important. But the last start against Alpinista was really not good, and then you go back further on in the year, beaten by State of Rest, which certainly wasn't a bad thing in the Prix, but just overall, it just seems like a cup below. I'm not the biggest. I don't like Bubble Gift in this race, and that was this horse's only win, and it just really seems like he's lost the form from that Group 1 win that he had last year over Gold Trip in May of 2021. So passing on him in this race, as is Eric.
On to number 4, that is Sealiway, post 15. Horse who has really struggled, and there's a lot of reasons he might be struggling. Of course, a horse who won the Champions Stakes a year ago, very solid upset there, but then allegations came out against the Rossi family, or essentially proven allegations that they had a doping ring going on, and since switching to the Griffard barn, Sealiway he struggled. I mean, that's plain and simple. Last race being most evident when he was 4th out of 6 in a Group 3 over this course as a heavy favorite. So it has been a tough year for him. And I think part of it also might be the Saudi Cup was his first run of the year, not a dirt horse. That could have set him back a bit. Either way, a lot has gone against him. And one more thing. The only time he's tried the mile and a half was the Arc a year ago. Didn't run too terribly, 5th, but it was clear that the distance was getting to him. So I think all these factors line up against him. A horse who might still have a semblance of class. This year has just been really rough on him. The horses he's been losing to, really with the exception of losing to State of Rest back in May at Longchamp. Outside of that, not much going for him. I think he's a pretty easy pass. One of the easiest passes, I think, in the field.
Yeah, certainly a very easy pass. I would have thought, even going into this race without the Rossi family allegations, that he's more of a mile and a quarter horse. So if we just completely forget about that, that certainly would be something that I would, look at him as just a horse that is probably better going a mile and an eighth to a mile and a quarter. But then when you add the factors of the Rossi family, certainly doesn't make me any more likely to want to go with Sealiway in this race. Did have some good runs last year behind St. Mark's Basilica, second in the French Derby. His Arc run was good. And it was actually what led to Eric and I both had him in the Champion Stakes last year. It was actually what led us to go with him in that Champion Stakes. But subsequently from that, just hasn't really found footing this year, and no reason to go to Sealiway in this race. He just hasn't proven to be able to run top level this year. So like Eric, I also very easily passed on him in this spot.
Alenquer is next, number 5 from draw 12. Group 1 winner this year. He took out the Tattersall's Gold Cup back in May. A win that looked pretty promising at the time, but the form since then has been pretty hit or miss for the horses he's beat. And just in general, Alenquer throughout the year has been hit or miss. 2 wins accompanied by 2 really bad performances, in my eyes at least, in his last 2 starts. And then the run at Maidan actually wasn't too bad in the Shima Classic. He was 6th, but he was not far off of Shahryar on that day. So a horse who is good, but when he has faced horses, especially some that show up in here, he has tended to struggle. And he found a slightly easier spot. That's what got him the Group 1 victory. But in my eyes, he's been a horse that has consistently proven to just always be a cup below even the best. And as we described, the best this year isn't really the best, but a lot of the horses that have beaten him are here again today, and there's nothing in my eyes that can turn that around.
Yeah, let's go back to the Dubai Shima Classic. Alenquer was my value play horse in that race, and he ran 6th there, and he was only beaten a length and a half. And I thought that foreshadowed a really strong year for Alenquer. If we look at his runs last year, he was 2nd behind Mishriff in the International. He was 3rd in the Grand Prix de Paris behind Hurricane Lane. He was 2nd, he won at Royal Ascot, actually, in the King Edward VII Stakes there. So really good form going into the Arc last year. He was beaten 6 3/4 lengths there, but he was, you look at the horses that were finishing in front of him. You had the top 3 last year: Hurricane Lane, Adyar, Tarnawa, obviously the winner, Torquatorr Tasso, Snowfall. So there were good horses finishing in front of him. And then subsequently, a couple starts in the year, really good form really good form going into that, and then just did not really progress at all after his win in the Tattersall's Gold Cup. And subsequently, with how well State of Rest won at Royal Ascot, I really don't know how State of Rest didn't win that race at the Curragh, especially given the form that Alenquer and High Definition have shown since then. But really, since then, Alenquer has left a lot to be desired. His effort in the Coral Eclipse was terrible. His effort in the Irish Champions Stakes last time out was not any better. And I also just don't think 1.5 miles is really Alenquer's game. It seems like he's more of a 1.25 mile horse to begin with anyway. And then obviously you bring up the form that he's in his recent races. Just an easy pass in this race, and a horse that I was certainly very disappointed on, because I hit big on him in the Tattersall's Gold Cup, and I thought that could foreshadow a really strong year for him. Certainly has not, and a horse that I have to admit was certainly not as good as I thought he maybe could have been.
And we'll now move on to the first of the Japanese contingent in here. That's the 6 Deep Bond from Post 5. He's a winner over this course. He won last September, prepping for last year's Arc, where he was last beaten 43 lengths. I do think the ground probably played a factor into that poor performance. He's won 1 of 3 starts since this year, I should say, 4 starts since then, 3 coming this year, 1 of them being a victory. But his last 2 starts, he's been beaten by Titleholder, who's one of the leading contenders in here, certainly leads the Japanese contingent, and is their best hope to finally win the Arc this year. And he hasn't really been close to him in those 2 runs, and also hasn't ran since June. Big concern. I mean, that kind of layoff into such a big race certainly does him no favors. So, big outsider for all the right reasons. While I think that people might read into the Arc run last year and be an automatic toss, I don't think that's the reason to toss him. I think the fact he isn't any better than Titleholder, certainly the reason to look against him.
That and the layoff is also a reason why I'm not going to be going to Deep Bond in this race. Again, form over soft ground, certainly not great. I agree with Eric, though, that it's not necessarily the worst, or he's not necessarily the worst horse in here, but I have a general rule: don't pick horses off of significant layoffs. He's off of a significant layoff, and he's running in another country, so he's a pretty easy pass on for me in this spot.
Next will be Broome, number 7, breaking from Post 14. One of a couple runners in here for Aidan O'Brien, and honestly, I think we're looking at a glorified pacemaker in this spot for both Luxembourg and Deuce, who has common ownership. A Group 1 caliber runner, and he won very nicely in the Hardwick earlier this year at Royal Ascot, going 1.5 miles, but his runs since then have been pretty dry. We know he likes to probably be forwardly placed, and certainly would be helpful for a deep closer in Deuce, and a horse who likes to come from kind of off the pace in Luxembourg to be benefited by that. So he's a nice horse, but I don't think he's going to be used to win in this race.
Yeah, and I didn't even think about that when Eric brings up the potential pacemaker angle with Broome in here. But the thing that really puts me off of him is his run at Saratoga. And, I'm not a big person in European horses are automatically inferior or superior to American horses. That being said, I will say I thought Broome should have run a little bit better at Saratoga last time. Yeah, his win in the Hardwick at Ascot was good, but, how much do you... I actually liked Mostahdaf a little bit in this race, but... looking at the form underneath there, how good is Mostahdaf? Really, Hurricane Lane has not progressed at all. And really, outside of that, you'd have to go all the way back to Del Mar and the Breeders' Cup to find a somewhat good run for him. Broome was well beaten in the Arc last year. I just think that Broome is an easy pass for me in this spot.
Next will be another Japanese representative and another bit of a price in Stay Foolish. From the outside draw, post 20 does him no favors as a horse who probably wants to be on the lead. Adds to what I don't think will be a hot pace overall, but certainly will be beneficial to horses coming from just off, if not slightly further back in this spot. But Stay Foolish, very impressive earlier this year, swept both of the Middle Eastern marathon grass races, the Red Sea Turf Handicap on Group 3, followed that up with a Group 2 win in the Dubai Gold Cup. 2 runs since then, though, don't offer any hope in terms of winning this. Was well beaten by Titleholder and then Takurazaka Keenan back in June, and then one local prep came in a Group 2 that he finished second in, and the horse that beat him in there runs in a race on Saturday, a Group 2, and is rated at about 11 to 14 to 1 for that. So if that's any indication of the class there, it doesn't seem like Stay Foolish has anything to do in here other than be near the lead and maybe force a quicker pace.
And it's not like Stay Foolish was really running up against the toughest horses in the Middle East there. And, he's another one that just doesn't post Middle Eastern form. That form can be kind of dubious. And outside of that, I mean, there's not a whole lot to his record. You go and look at some of his races in Japan, the run in the Grade 1 there back in June, not good. Local prep at Deauville, or local prep at least in France. He was beaten a length and a quarter there, but as Eric mentioned, the horse that beat him there is not really well regarded for that start. So another one that he's got some good resume to him. Maybe you can find some upside for him. If you really liked the runs in either Riyadh or at Meydan, then maybe, but I think he's a horse you just got to stay away from in this spot. I'm going to stay away from him. I would probably advise others to stay away from him as well.
Another John and Vadeni Gosden representative up next. That's the 9. Mostahdaf from post 16. Comes off a victory, Group 3 victory in the September Stakes at Kempton over the all-weather. And it was a very good victory. But he's a horse who's always hung below the Group 1 level. He's only made one Group 1 start. That was as a 3-year-old, and actually came going a mile in the St. James's Palace, where while he had a bad trip, he really had no chance in there to begin with. And, looking back on it, and in my eyes going into it. But of course, he's been running in Group 2s, Group 3s since going these longer distances, 3 straight starts at the mile and a half. And, of course, comes off a win at the distance, was a good second behind Broome in that Hardwick, but no experience against Group 1 company. And while I will continue to say this is not a very strong rendition of the Arc, still not a one that I think Mostahdaf could take on. If he had a couple more victories at the Group 2, Group 3 level, I'd feel a little bit better about it. But the fact he's not been able to put it together slightly below, that to me means he probably cannot get it done here.
Mostahdaf is another horse that I liked a little bit. If we go back to July, I thought that Mostahdaf actually had a chance against Yabir in the Newmarket State, or in the Princess of Wales, mixing up the royal family there at Newmarket. I thought that Yabir, being as weird as he is, could potentially lose. And Mostahdaf was coming out of strong races at the time, what looked like strong races. Obviously beaten by Broome in the Hardwick. He was beaten by Baybridge at Sandown when Baybridge was at the point where he looked like he could potentially be good Group 1 level. And then before that, 3 straight wins to his name. So he had some good form going into that Princess of Wales Stakes at Newmarket. But then subsequently, when he ran as poorly as he did there, that's really what... Looking back at that kind of pushes me off of him. Yeah, the start at Kempton last time out was pretty good, but, he's a cut below Group 1 level. He does have experience over the mile and a half, so that certainly is a good thing for him. But I didn't like Broome, And if I didn't like Broome, I can't like a horse that was significantly beaten by Broome. One thing that I will mention that is of the benefit for him, he does have 2 wins over soft going. So, if you're really playing the ground angle here, those are both at a mile, but if you're really playing the ground angle, he could be a horse that you look at too at a price. But just overall, Mostahdaf looks like a couple O in this spot.
Mendocino splits the field number 10, but he does have the 1 hole, so not very ideal in a big group like this. Comes off that victory, though, the Group 1 win over Torquatorr Tasso in early September. His first win of the year, his first win in a year. A horse who's always been consistent and really seemed to figure it out in that last start. And listen, he hasn't really ran incredibly. In his last start of 2021, he was beaten just less than a length by Alpinista and was running credible races all in between that run and his win in his most previous start. So I don't think he's really without a chance in here. Rated at about 30-1 in most markets, around there at least, maybe a little lower, maybe a little higher. But I don't think he's crazy. I think he honestly sports very similar credentials to Torquatorr Tasso a year ago. Now, I'm not going to use that to lean on him to win. He's not going to be my winner in this spot, but I don't think he's going to run a terrible race. I think he can sit a pretty solid trip. He'll have to work it out, of course, probably find himself in some traffic, but it's not impossible. If you go back 2 starts ago, I think that's really what did me in terms of not going with him, because he was behind Mare Australis and Bubble Gift, both horses who, we'll say it for both of them, good, not good enough to win this. And the fact that you lost to both of them without many excuses doesn't give me much hope for this spot. So a horse who I think is truly second rate in here, maybe if things go perfectly for him, he can win it. But that'd be a very perfect world. So kind of that final group you toss before you get to your, the nitty gritty of who you like most.
Does have good success over soft going, and that is something that I've been harping on that point, and I can put that out there as a reason to like Mendocino in this spot. And then obviously the victory last time out over Torquatorr Tasso. If you like Torquatorr Tasso, maybe that pushes you towards a horse who's going to be definitely a better price than him. But the effort at Chantilly in the Grand Prix de Chantilly, certainly a bit off-putting, but does have 1.5 mile experience and certainly isn't without a chance. If you're seriously playing this race, this is a horse to look at for some kind of a place wager, because he is going to be a fair price. He is relatively consistent overall. If you look at that, if you look past that effort in the Grand Prix de Chantilly, has not missed the board in terms of running top 4 in his career outside of that one effort at Chantilly, and then plenty of in the money finishes in mixed in that career. So certainly not without a chance to run decently in here. Not personally for me, but there are reasons to like Mendocino in this spot.
Number 11 from hole 10 is Titleholder, the highest rated chance for Japan to once again get their first ARC win. That's a recurring theme every year. A horse was a very good resume, though. I mean, certainly could hold a candle to most of the horses that have come from the land of the rising sun and tried this prestigious race. 4 wins in his last 5 starts, undefeated this year, and including 2 very impressive Group 1 wins in his last 2 starts. The Tenno Show win back in May was incredible. I mean, he just blitzed a field of 18. It was very, very impressive. And he's always been one of those more highly regarded horses in Japan, especially, of course, because what he's done in his last 5 starts. Problem is, he hasn't run since June 26th. That's a very big layoff. Of course, got to factor in shipping and everything, but you'd always hope maybe of local prep to get him going. That's what a handful of Japanese horses have done in recent years now. Not to much success, but it certainly scares you a little bit that he hasn't run since late June. So he has the talent, I think, to contend in this group, but that factor does scare me. Also a horse who doesn't have much soft ground experience. In fact, all of his runs have been at least good, and most of them have been good to firm, especially his best runs. So that's another big concern, is not having that true soft ground experience, because that's got to be so essential, and it's hard to get that in Japan because they aren't a ton of races over ground like that, but nevertheless, it is a big concern. So a horse who I feel like if he had a run in Europe, I'd feel a lot better about him, but given he doesn't have that, given he doesn't have the ground experience, he's a horse you just have to play cautiously against, because there's certainly reason to think he can't win this. And also, I think it's fair to say that Japanese track record is so shoddy in this race, that's another reason to think he can't get it done here.
Japan has tried and tried and tried and tried and tried again to win this race, and their horses just keep coming up short every single time. We can run down the list. I'm not going to, but there have been plenty of Japanese horses. Westover, the most notable one, I guess you could say, that looks like they're going to do it, and something happens in the race and they don't get it done. And the big thing for Titleholder with me, ground certainly not ideal that he doesn't have experience over the going, but it is the layoff. I can't take a horse going into a race as wide open as this off of a 4-month layoff in a different country, having to ship as far as Titleholder has. And there are horses that are certainly in a much better stretch in terms of amount of runs in recent days, or in recent months, I should say, than Titleholder. So I'm going to take a pass on Titleholder here, but I did have to consider him because his form was so good. He was one of the horses that I was tossing around with Torquatorr Tasso, and the horse who I will eventually end up picking in this race. But Titleholder had to draw the line somewhere, and that was where I drew the line.
Number 12, post 13, Bubble Gift, a horse we've already referenced a few times because she's in a lot of running lines, he's in a lot of running lines, especially hitting the board and running really credible races. But does a bridesmaid ever become the bride? Most of the time not, especially at this high of a level. Comes off a really good Group 2 run last time out, beaten just about a length. Same could be said behind Alpinista in the Group 1 back in July. Same can be said for the Group 2 effort 3 back when just 2 lengths off Mare Australis. So always consistent, but never getting it done. And that's kind of been the theme for Bubble Gift. Now, he does have some decent wins here and there, but just being a couple low has been his deal. Ran last year in the ARC, finished 8th, beaten only 5.5. Ran well and finished up strongly. It's not like distance will be an issue for this colt, but at the end of the day, hard to envision he can turn the tables when so often his claim to fame is being there but not really being there.
He's running behind good horses in Group 2 and Group 3 races. Yeah, he is Group 1 placed in the Grand Prix de Saint-Cloud behind Alpinista, but I'm not the biggest fan of Alpinista. And you go back in some of his other Group 1 efforts. He was beaten in the ARC by 5 lengths, but he was beaten by all the good horses in the ARC last year, while beaten behind Hurricane Lane in the Grand Prix de Paris back in July of 2021. And, when he just steps up to tougher competition, he gets beat in those spots. And that's really just the read on Bubble Gift. The other thing is Bubble Gift doesn't really seem to like soft ground that much. It was very soft when he was beaten by Hurricane Lane in the Grand Prix de Paris. He did win over it back in May of 2021, but, shoddy record. Some good runs, some not so good runs. I would chalk his poor runs, his Group 1 efforts up to the class of competition more so than the going, but it is certainly something to think about. Shoddy record for him, but pass for me in this spot.
Grand Glory is next from post 9, number 13. A Group 1 winner, going a mile, going a solid route of ground, beat a Breeders' Cup champ in Adario last year in August, has a big price in the Prix Jean Romanet. Since then, hasn't been running in Group 1 company with tons of success. Now, I will say, really good run in the Prix de l'Opera last year as well to finish off the year over very heavy ground when just losing to Rougier, but Group 1 company has not been her favor so far, or since the 5 runs since. 2 wins, Group 3 listed company, Group 1's not so much, especially her last 2 starts. Was 3rd, split the field in the Prince of Wales, never really factored there. And then last out off of a minor break, lost the Prix Vermeil, finished 7th out of 11. Not too bad, but just this year, it's not like she's regressed. She just doesn't have the same punch that she did a year ago when she was on a really good streak, won 2 in a row, and then followed it up with a very heartbreaking defeat in the Prix de l'Opera. So a horse has always been good, always been consistent. Once again, hasn't taken a big step back this year, but it's just enough for you to really not be able to consider her a whole lot in this spot.
Yeah, there's a bunch of... She falls into a category that I would group a lot of horses in here, where you might like them if circumstances last time out were a little bit better, but they weren't. And honestly, with Grand Glory, maybe I could chalk the poor effort in the Prix Vermeil up to the 88-day break. But at the same time, again, she's just one of the several horses that I would group in this race as there's just stuff happened in the last race that I just can't look past. And ultimately, I got to take a pass on her in this spot.
We'll move on next to Alpinista, certainly one of the big favorites in this year's rendition from hole 6. She's coming in off a very hefty win streak, which has been featuring a lot of good Group 1s. I will say, though, those Group 1s have been interesting. Group 1s are not the premier races in Europe, coming in Germany primarily. Now, last time out, she should, stayed home, ran in the Yorkshire Oaks, and beat a pretty solid field on that day, going a mile and a half. Beat Tuesday, La Petite Coco, Lilac Road, Magical Lagoon. I mean, those are quality fillies that she was able to beat that day, and she did it in pretty convincing fashion. She's not a horse who wins by a lot, but she's always getting the job done. Of course, last year when she won in Germany, or one of her Group 1s in Germany, she beat Torquatorr Tasso, and then, of course, he went on to win the ARC. So she has some really good back class to her. Only 2 runs this year, but they've showed no regression from her wins earlier, or I should say last year. She's rounded into good form. But I will say, I won't say she's been dodging, but I will say that her Group 1s have not been those real elite Group 1s that you would think of when you think of a horse that's toppling the most premier races around. It's no secret. She's almost been dodging the best horses that she could find to pick up these victories. But there's no hiding now. She's racing the best that have shown up. Some of these 3-year-olds, some of these Japanese horses, they can absolutely play. It's the toughest field she's ever faced. And that's where the concern certainly rises, getting these basically cheaper Group 1 victories. But she started to maybe translate that into better ones this year, but this is going to be the best of the best, and she still has to prove she can hang with these horses. So that's where my concern lies. I do like that she's a bit tactical, though. That's a big positive for her. She can go to the lead. She can take back and make a big sweeping move. That's going to do her a lot of favors in a big field like this. But the talent's going to have to come through, and she's going to have to prove she can beat the best of the best.
Yeah, this is a very dubious angle, but I don't think she's beaten anybody this year. I know that, Eric, you talked about the good groups that they're the good group of fillies that she beat in the Yorkshire Oaks. I don't really think they're that good. I mean, Tuesday has disappointed consistently since Epsom. Magical Lagoon won the Irish Oaks by default. La Petite Coco did not really run back too well from her effort when she won the Pretty Polly, and I just, overall, there's not really a lot that I like from the Yorkshire Oaks, and she's been winning, you said it best, she's been winning a lot of cheap Group 1s, so, I could end up being wrong and foolish about this, but I've never been overly impressed with anything that Alpinista's done this year. She hasn't really beaten anybody great. I mean, you go and look at the Grand Prix de Saint Cloud, who was the best horse she was beating in there? Maybe it was Bubble Gift, maybe it was Lone Eagle, but certainly not anybody that is super high class. So I think she's worth a play against in here. She's going to take a fair amount of play. I don't trust her, and I'm willing to take the chance against her. There's a good chance I could get beat, but that's a chance I'm willing to take because I can't take her in this race with as many questions about her form as I do have.
Next will be 15, Vadeni, one of the best 3-year-olds in all of the world, breaks from post 2, comes off a loss when favored in the Irish Champion Stakes, but before that was on a 3-race winning streak that featured the Prix de Jockey Club as well as the Coral Eclipse. He's beaten some good horses, still has some things to prove, distance being, I think, the biggest thing, but class-wise, he's absolutely up there as it relates to this field. I think his win in June, Ashanti, the Prix de Jockey Club, was a powerhouse performance. Should he have been the winner of the Coral Eclipse? Probably not. Mishriff was definitely the best horse that day, but can't deny the quality of horses he was running against that day and how well he handled them in terms of holding off some good horses. Coming off of about 2 months of a layoff, lost to Luxembourg and Onesto in the Irish Champion Stakes, but wasn't beaten too far. My biggest concern is the distance. I really don't know if he's a 1.5 mile type. I feel like the connections aren't really sure he's a 1.5 mile type, but I think we've said that about quite a few horses, but I think everybody is looking at this race in the same sense of, given there's no real standout in the race, why not take a shot even if we aren't sure about the distance? Because no one else is sure about the distance. No one else knows their horse can do this. Everybody's doing the same thing. And I think that's what Jean-Claude Rouget is doing here with Vadeni. So that's my concern. Talent-wise, I definitely think he's top 2 or 3, if not the best, in the race. But I feel like that final furlong, 2 furlongs, is going to be his ultimate undoing. He'll run credibly. He'll finish top half of the field, but the distance is ultimately my biggest concern with him.
Talent-wise, I don't think Vadeni's a big problem in here, and I've been the biggest drum banger that Vadeni's not really that good overall, but distance, as big of a concern as it is for Eric, it's the reason why he is not winning this race, and spoiler alert, it's the reason why Luxembourg is also not winning this race. Now, I pulled out the damn excavator for this, but I'm going to throw a stat out there that I don't know how many people, are familiar with this stat or anything, and I don't know that it's even being brought up, but the record of horses that do not have form or that do not have experience over a mile and a half in the ARC is non-existent. I went back to 1980, and that was when I stopped because I didn't want to go any further because I didn't think it was relevant to go any further. 0 horses have ever won the ARC. 1980 was as far back as I went, but 0 horses have won the ARC since 1980 with no starts at a mile and a half. Concern already. And for horses that have starts at a mile and a half but no wins, there is not a horse that has started in a race or that has started but not won a mile and a half race since 1993. Urban Sea was the last horse to win the ARC without a win at a mile and a half before that. So that's some pretty significant history that Vadeni's going up against. Never having run in the ARC. So 42 years we're talking about of precedent of not having a start in a mile and a half and not winning the ARC. So that's the big reason why I'm not on Vadeni here. Spoiler alert, that's also why I'm not on Luxembourg in this race. Just throwing that out there here. But again, talent-wise, you have to respect him at this point because, while I don't think that he's the greatest horse in the world, there's no one else really here that I think is the greatest horse in the world either. So from that level, you have to respect him. But as I laid out, and I pulled out the excavator for this, the mile and a half is a big thing with the ARC, and not since 1980. Again, 1980 was as far back as I went. No horse with no start at a mile and a half has won the ARC. 1980 was as far back as I was willing to go, and it's probably even further than that. So that's why Vadeni will not win this race.
Up next will be another local, Hakeem, 16 from post 4. A really nice, late developing 3-year-old here. Broke his maiden as a juvenile and actually put a semi-tough race, and then 3 for 4 this year. Now it's been more light company, 3-year-old restricted races, but certainly putting on good performances. Comes off a Group 2 victory in August last time out. Before that was 4th when chasing Vadeni home in the Prix de Jockey Club. I will say this: I think that it's probably a little too much too soon, but he's a horse who has done a lot of good things, and he falls under the same. Hasn't run a mile and a half before. But he'll get the distance. He finishes off his races nicely. He's bred to get the mile and a half very well. So I don't think he's a winner this year, but just projecting beyond this, I think he'll be a nice 4-year-old or maybe even longer because he's doing all the right things. It comes up too quick. And who knows, maybe given how weak this field has been going through it, who knows, maybe this is the year a lightly raced, unexposed 3-year-old can take it out because there really isn't much else going for it. If this was the year for it to happen, it could happen. He's a horse I might look at to use in some underneath situations because there's a lot of potential there for this guy, especially getting some added ground.
He's not for me in this race. I understand the point that Eric's bringing up there, and I don't think that it's necessarily wrong, but just not for me in this spot. Beaten in the French Derby by Vadeni in June, going into that start last time at Deauville. Yeah, it was good, but at the same time, there are horses in here that are at a price. You gotta look what you can do. I like a couple other horses. Or there are horses that I prefer at this kind of a price more so than I prefer Al Hakeem. I think it's I think Eric does bring up a good point. Definitely one to keep an eye on going into next year, but not for me at the minute at least.
Next will be Onesto, another one of these 3-year-olds who's taken the right steps forward. As the year is going on, he comes off a very good second in the Irish Champion Stakes, just missing out against Luxembourg at a bit of a mild price. Before that, took out a Group 1 victory in the Grand Prix de Paris, going a mile and a half, so that checks a box there. Over softer ground, checks another box. Now, I will say, was the field the strongest? Probably not, but having that experience going for you is huge. And on top of that, he beat Elder Elderov, and Elder Elderov at a mile and a half is a lot different than Elder Elderov at a mile and 3/4, but still an impressive victory no matter what. 2 for 5 this year, but credible runs all around. And honestly, all you have to do is take the last two to really run with him. A horse certainly, he's kind of in that second level. Maybe would be considered a mild upset if he won, but he's a horse that has a lot of good word around him based off his last few efforts, and rightfully so.
Yeah, he ran really well toward the end at Leopardstown, and certainly backed up the effort that he had in the Grand Prix de Paris back in July, and then subsequently was flattered by Eldorov, who won the Ledger. And yeah, Eric, you mentioned Eldorov at 1.5 miles is different than Eldorov at 1.75 miles, but the race also didn't set up for Eldorov at all. So I think it certainly does look good on Onesto that a horse that he beat did come back to run as well as Eldorov did, but that's not really the main point as to why I like Onesto as much as I like him in this spot, and it is the 1.5 mile experience. I'm looking for that. I have it. He also has the experience over the soft ground, which certainly isn't a bad thing. And Vadeni blitzed him in the French Derby at Chantilly, but he was running up toward the end, and not that he was ever going to catch Vadeni in that race, but closed on really well toward the end in the French Derby, and I thought that the run there was pretty good. I was all in on Eldorov in the Grand Prix de Paris. Ultimately didn't pan out there, and then I didn't really consider him at Leopardstown last time. But looking at those past two races, I think that he really has a good shot to win this race. And, Eric said maybe he's considered a mild upset. I think that he absolutely has a shot to spoil the party in this race. And, when we get to my pick eventually, I'll talk about that. Not 100% settled yet, but I like Onesto quite a bit in this race.
Next is the Irish Derby winner, Westover. Very big performance that day that he did not back up when running a very bad fifth in the King George at Ascot in late July. He's a horse who it's hard to get a great read on. I mean, that was a very poor performance, and it's not like there was a huge excuse out of it. It seemed like he was just kind of beating himself more than anything, and then he hasn't run since. But before that, you absolutely had to consider him a nice horse. He won the Classic Trial to prep for the Derby, where he ran very credibly behind Desert Crown, who I wish was here at this point. I mean, we've talked about this field. I wish Desert Crown was here. He would have been my pick whenever we started this at. I think he would have been my pick. So that's my little tangent. We're here now, but he bounced back nice to win the Irish Derby after a good third at Epsom. Westover did, and then the disappointing run at Ascot. And he hasn't run since, which is a big concern. So if he can run back to his earlier races, I think he's probably a contender, because it just looked like he was getting better and better and better. I mean, we're talking about a horse who was favored in the King George over an ARC winner and a Group 1 caliber horse and Pile Driver and Mishriff and all these horses, and he just ran so terribly. Hard to bounce back in a race of this caliber, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he put in a big performance, because that was certainly far from his best, that last effort. So not for me off the layoff, but I can absolutely see why somebody would like him, because he looked like the goods two-back, and even before that, and one with good distance experience, all those different things. The last run made so little sense that it'd be fair to take him in this, and it'd be fair to expect him to win this.
Eric was being a lot more polite than I'm going to be to Westover. Last time out was horrible, and I'm sure every single person agrees that last time out was horrible, but it was something that I saw coming. Now, I didn't think that he was going to run that bad, but Westover didn't beat anybody in the Irish Derby. I mean, Pisbadil came back and ran horrible in the Grand Prix de Paris. French Claim didn't run well in the Ledger, and Tuesday, hasn't really run that well since the Oaks. And outside of that, I mean, he didn't really beat anybody there. The Derby form has not come back to be great outside of, Desert Crown we haven't seen back yet, and I'm not here to say that Desert Crown wasn't a good Derby winner or anything like that, but from what we've seen out of Epsom, hasn't been good. And Westover jumped up to face Olders at Ascot, and he looked like a 3-year-old that was facing other 3-year-olds that aren't any good. Now, he wasn't facing anybody that was really that good at Epsom, and I guess that's another reason to be super concerned about that. I just don't like Westover at all in this race. Now, I considered him slightly because he's got a 1.5 mile experience, and that's the big thing that I'm leaning on here. And I like him more than the other 3-year-olds, as I mentioned, because he's actually got the 1.5 mile experience. And, while I may not like him at all, again, I'm very cynical on this ARC field. I don't like many horses in this race. So it might have been a default thing, but after that effort at Ascot, plus looking at the form from the Irish Derby, cannot go with Westover here. I understand why some might look at that Irish Derby and take it. I can't, because I don't think it was a good race. And I'm going to look elsewhere here, because I can't. I can't stomach the Ascot effort with what the Irish Derby has become since its running.
Number 19 is your Japanese Derby winner and the final Japanese representative in the race, Deuce. Very lightly raced, only 5 career starts. Ran very well in Japan. 1 start last year was a good win. Prepped well for the Japan Derby, which he eventually won. Only his 2nd career victory. Then off the break, about 3.5 months, comes in, preps at Longchamp for this race. Heavy favorite, almost even money, and doesn't do much running. Finishes 4th, beaten by Sim Camille, who actually is a horse who has a lot of overlapping form with some of the 3-year-olds in this arc, who is not going to be running in the arc. But point being, horse who has similar form, actually almost beat Onesto in the Grand Prix de Paris, but nevertheless, Deuce ran up against him. So if you can kind of find some overlapping form between Deuce and some of the other 3-year-olds showing up in the arc. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt from the run, given he was coming from off the pace. Pace didn't really generate for him. Picked up nicely, and he was coming off a layoff. And it was his first run on soft ground. I didn't think he disgraced himself. But I will say, I don't think that translates into a victory here. I mean, once again, giving him the benefit of the doubt, but you consider the Japanese record, you consider that he really could have still ran a little better, and at the end of the day, he only has 2 victories, and they've all been runs against 3-year-olds, all these different things. Don't see how that translates into a victory here. So just a horse who has the talent, it's a little too soon for him to get the job done in this spot. Now, one other really random thing is he is out of an American mare. We know the Japanese do this, but I don't think I ever would have guessed that a daughter of Dustin Diamonds, who chased home Groupie Doll in a Breeders' Cup Filly Mare Sprint one year, would have an offspring running in the arc, but here we are.
I'll give another reason why you could forgive Deuce, and that was he was coming off a bit of a break, just over 100 days, and shipping into a new country. So another reason why you might give him the benefit of the doubt from that last run, in addition to the other circumstances that Eric brought up there. I like Onesto, and so I have to respect Sim Camille a little bit in this race, and I did. The form that Sim Camille, or the form from the race with Sim Camille, excuse me for my talking out there, but I have to respect that a little bit, but I don't think that the race is going to be his for Deuce, but at the right price, I mean, he's 33-1 right now, I'm using Sky Bet right now for my bookmaker right now, so at the minute he's 33-1, certainly worth a look at in terms of some kind of horse to use underneath here, and as I said, I like the form that Sim Camille has kept, and Deuce has reasons to rebound in this spot. I don't necessarily think he's a win candidate or anything, but horse to consider at a price in this race, certainly, and not one that I will overlook when it comes to looking at this race at that time.
And finally, we've gotten to the 20th. That is your likely favorite, Luxembourg. Comes in off a Group 1 victory for Aidan O'Brien. He breaks from post 8, and a very interesting horse who was all the rage, reaching towards the Derby, ran in the Guineas as well, just to see if he could do it. Wasn't favored, but ran in it. Ran a very credible 3rd. All eyes pointed to the Derby. Injury forces him to miss that in a couple more months, but he bounced back better than ever. Great Group 3 win. Off the break, follows that up with the win in the Irish Champion Stakes. Now he's going to fall under, Jack mentioned earlier, the distance is a question, a very big question. He's never gone a mile and a half, and that's going to be beating a lot of history if he can do it. Now, people thought he could be a mile and a half horse as a 2-year-old because, of course, he was the Derby favorite for so long. You look at his pedigree, he's bred to do this. He's bred to probably get the mile and a half. He's by Camelot, so that question is answered. He has a half-brother that's a winner going a mile and a half, so there's certainly reason to believe he can do it. But doing it for the first time in a race like this is a bit of a different question, and that's where I get a little concerned. I think that eventually he could probably win a Group 1 going a mile and a half. I just don't know if it's here. And just in general, I've kind of avoided it just till we got to the end of this. I have not been a big fan of the 3-year-olds in Europe throughout the year. I've made that known in other Racing Rundown content, but first time here, I've not been a big believer in them. And you look at Luxembourg and you look at his win last time out, it was primarily against 3-year-olds. I mean, the ones that weren't are horses that probably Mishriff's off form, Alenquer just isn't really tried and true Group 1, and then there's Broome, who was setting the pace for Luxembourg to come get it. So that just leaves the 3-year-olds, and I really am not overly taken by that bunch, and that performance there doesn't translate to a Group 1 victory here. So I don't think he's just that much better than everybody to go a mile and a half for the first time and win this race. I think he's a favorite that, the odds are always going to be favorable in a 20-horse field. Getting, 3-4 to 1 on him, 7 to 2, fine. Of course, he's not unbettable. But to me, I don't think he can win the race given trying to overcome certain things. And I also just question everything that he has beaten to this point.
Aidan O'Brien said he was over the moon last time with the effort that Luxembourg turned in that Irish Champion Stakes. And Aidan O'Brien has been talking big about this horse, and the talk has obviously been very big about him, basically for his entire career. But as I said, I pulled out the excavator for this. I'm not going to do all the work and then completely jump in the face of what I spent about 20 minutes trying to dig and find. And that is obviously the distance with Luxembourg. And Aidan O'Brien also doesn't have the greatest record with 3-year-olds in the ARC. So that's another thing when you think about, when you look at it from that perspective. I agree with Eric. This is a horse that could potentially get a mile and a half, but I just don't think this is the race to go with him in. Now, yeah, he's a favorite, but he's not going to be unbettable because it's a huge field and he's going to be a very fair price and all that fun stuff. I get that. Here's the issue. I don't like the 3-year-olds either. I have certainly joined Eric on that. And the mile and a half thing. And the other problem is Aidan O'Brien didn't sound super confident with the going for him. He said he wanted it to be more on the good side. It's soft right now. I'm not sure that, he can't do soft ground because he did win last time at Leopardstown going on the soft ground. But Aidan O'Brien said he wanted it to be more less towards the soft side, which if it's soft, then that automatically means that they're less confident with that horse or with Luxembourg in this spot. So I am going to take against Luxembourg here for mile and a half reason. I don't think I think it's just a little bit too quick for him. I think next year he could develop into a fine horse, but this is not the spot I want to take him in. And ultimately, so it's a little bit of distancing, it's a little bit of going thing, it's a little bit of I don't like any of the 3-year-olds thing, and a little bit of Aidan O'Brien's record in the ARC with 3-year-olds mixed in there. So there's a lot of reasons I don't like Luxembourg, but big reason is the mile and a half thing. None in their first start ever at a mile and a half going back to 1980 have won. So that's, as I said, I've been hammering that point. I'm going to keep hammering that point with my stuff in the ARC.
And now we'll get on finally getting through all 20 horses. Kind words for some of them, not some kind words for a lot of them. We'll get into our choices. And I'm ultimately going to side with a horse who I think every step of the way throughout this year leading up to this point, I don't think anybody would have expected me to pick. I've been very cynical about this horse for much of her career, but ultimately I do land on Alpinista, one of the favorites. Probably going to go off second or third choice when all things are said and done. But the reason I went with her is I have been saying for so much of the lead up to this race, it's a weak group. The 3-year-olds are weak. The older horses are weak. There's just nobody that's separating themselves. They're all kind of beating up on each other. And they all have a lot of things to prove. And when it came to Alpinista, well, she's won. She just keeps putting wins together. She's won, 7 races in a row. And sure, last year's races I don't give her much credit for. Some of them were good, no doubt, but they were those cheaper races that we were talking about. But this year, she's beaten horses who are either here or have overlapping form with horses that show up, so on and so forth. I mean, you go back to her win 2 back, beat Bubble Gift, Mare Australis. Sure, these horses are long shots, but they're still here. And on top of that, she also beat horses with a lot of Group 1 caliber and Lone Eagle and High Definition and Hurricane Lane, who was favored in this race a year ago. And I know he's not the same horse in 2022, but the fact of the matter is she beat a highly touted horse like him. And, of course, she beat Torquatorr Tasso, the defending champion, a year ago. And she beat Mendocino, who beat Torquatorr Tasso last year. And last time out, I know Tuesday's fallen off form and things like that, but still, the overlapping form is all there. You can backtrack it to all these horses who are also in this race. And Alpinista just takes care of them every single time. So I basically, everything I've been saying would be going against picking Alpinista, who's really done everything right to this point. And I know there's questions about which he's beaten, but who doesn't have those questions? So especially in my final points, I just don't like the 3-year-olds, and those are the only horses she really doesn't have that form against. But at the same time, if they're not good enough and they haven't gone the distance and all those different things, no reason for me to go with them. No reason for me to go against Alpinista in here. So I'm going to go with a horse who knows how to put wins together and take one of the likely favorites.
And there is a reason for me to go against Alpinista in this race, and that reason is going to be Onesto. The only 3-year-old that I think is actually worth going with in this spot, which is why I'm picking him. And I'm really going to center on something that Eric said. Really just take the last 2 races for him. The Grand Prix de Paris was a very strong race, and he ran really well last time out. At 1.25 miles at Leopardstown, really looked like a horse that wanted to go 1.5 miles in that spot, and I think maybe, gets there if we're going 1.5 miles. We don't need to litigate that here. He's got form over the soft ground. He's got form at 1.5 miles, and that was also at Longchamp, which is a very good thing for me. So he checks 3 boxes for me: distance, going, and trip at the race course. So I think that he is very much worth a try in this spot. And I don't want to be price hunting in here or anything like that. I just think that with the questions I have with Vadeni, the questions I have with Westover, the questions I have with Luxembourg, the questions I have with Alpinista, I have questions with Onesto too, but I'm willing to try something in this race, get a little bit creative, and I'm going to go with Onesto in here. It's a little bit of a bold pick, but I'm going to do it because there's nobody else in here that I really can get behind. So I'm going to try someone who's a little bit off the beaten path, but not really too much of a crazy shot like a Mishriff or a Mostahdaf or anything like that. Did like Mostahdaf a little bit underneath, as I mentioned, but ultimately I'm gonna go with Onesto in this spot, and that's gonna be it for our very long ARC preview. We did want to put a lot into this, so there are timestamps in this. I didn't mention that at the top of the video, but I will mention that in the description, that there are timestamps. So hopefully you were able to stick with us for this. Really do appreciate it if you went through all 20 of the horses, or if you only looked for the ones that you were interested to. That's why we include the timestamps, so you can use them to consume the video how you please. There will be a couple other racing rundown previews that will be coming tomorrow, or actually today, Friday, when you are most likely listening to this, for races in the United States on Saturday. And with that being mentioned, that's going to be it for Racing Rundown this week. We will see you next time. Have a good one.